Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of DoD Contract Academy. This week I have a special episode because we're tackling a subject matter I have never tackled in the years that we've been doing the podcast. I've got Lisa Rehurek here with the RFP Success Company, and she focuses on state contracts, local government, which as I focus on federal and DoD. So this is going to be a little bit different. Certainly a lot of the people listening to the show also look at state and local. So first, Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk to you and learn myself a little bit more about state and local because we certainly get a lot of questions about it. And up until this point, I've just avoided it all because that is not my area of expertise. But we've talked in the past a few times actually, and through email and a call and a lot about this particular area. This is your ballywick, for lack of a better term. So if we could, maybe let's learn a little bit more about you. How'd you get to the point where you became an expert on state and local government and then starting this company helping other businesses sell to state and local?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually started in corporate America. I got thrown into a position that I didn't really know what I was doing. I had a little bit of RFP experience from the hospitality industry, but their RFPs are wildly different. And I remember the first day them asking me, I worked for a global consulting firm that did healthcare specifically for government healthcare programs. And I remember them asking me, have you ever worked on an RFP? And I was like, oh yeah, I totally got this. I've worked on them a bunch. And then they threw this 200-page document on my desk and I was like, huh, what is this? It
What
was
is that thing?
a little bit different. So I spent quite a few years in that environment learning proposals, and it was all state government focused around Medicaid. And I didn't know what I was doing. Learned a whole lot the hard way, unfortunately, but that just helps me more today. One thing led to another. I left corporate America, started my own business, and really was a general business coach slash consultant for a while, which for the record doesn't work when you just say, oh, I can help anybody with everything. So I was looking for that niche and it found me. People from my past were calling, asking, do you still work with RFPs? And I said, sure, absolutely. At that time, I needed to do anything. And then I thought, huh, actually might be a business here. And what's so funny, Ricky, is that I remember thinking, that can't possibly be enough business for for me to do a whole business around this, but that's laughable now that I
Yeah.
know. But yeah, and so here we are. I really started this company, the RP Success Company, in about 2016.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, you're totally right. You have to be specific, especially when you're consulting or you're building a business. And honestly, I feel like the more specific and I get, the better we do. Because you know, plus, like, you become the expert, right? And you also know what to say no to, right? So for me, it's always been saying no to state and local stuff because
Federal, yes,
yeah,
exactly.
no, that's amazing. And it's interesting to me too. Those that have listened for a while may know I had someone on the show, Brandy Foster, and her specialty, what you're saying reminds me of her backstory because her specialty was grant writing. And it was very much the same thing. She ended up working for different companies and universities. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, do you know how to write a grant? She's like, nope. And she just learned from like one of the professors there and they just started doing amazing, like getting great results, but learning the hard way, just doing it and doing it. And then again, I think that I resonate with this too. Find out where your niche is when people start just calling you and asking you if you can
It's
work in that area. Right.
yep.
Awesome. Okay. So 2016, you started your business, RFP Success Company. Tell us maybe a little bit about what are the top three things that you're doing there?
In the state government space with
Mhm.
our yep. So there's a couple of things. One, we've always traditionally been an RFP response management company, right? Support services, which is still what we do. We do a lot of that. We have long-term clients that work with us, but we're actually just rolling out some small business things that it's really close to my heart. I'm small business and running a small business is hard, right? You got to do
Mhm.
everything, got to do everything yourself. And
Yep.
I think that state government contracting is such a beautiful thing for small businesses because especially if you can be a certified small business in any sort of way. So we have some new programs that we're rolling out that are more accessible to the small businesses and an ongoing membership so the small businesses can access experts without spending five figures to hire us to help them with an RFP response. That's pretty fun. So we've got kind of those small business offerings, and then we do RFP support where we help source, we help assess, and then we help them bid on their RFPs.
Okay, great. Sounds like you could help them find the leads for the RFPs, help them decide whether to go after them or not, and then actually write them. Yep. And we do some of that too. This is gonna be an interesting conversation because I think a lot of people listening are going to be interested in what are the differences between state and federal. And we talked a little bit about it, and there's a couple areas I'd like to talk about there. I want to talk timeline, and I'd also like to talk about the certifications, right? And maybe we even start there because you were just talking about the certifications and some of the things that you're doing. So in federal, most of the certifications that you're going to get as a small business, you register in sam.gov, you can self-identify, but those aren't really the certifications. Really, if you want the big certifications for federal are going to be HubZone, woman-owned small business, service disabled, veteran-owned small business, and 8A. Those are the first. I might be missing one or two, but each one of those, you have to go through the SBA, the Small Business Administration or Association. I always get that one. And they have a process. And in some cases, it takes a long time. 8A takes like 6 months, could take longer. SDVOSB is actually pretty quickly. I have an SDVOSB. I did that in just a couple of weeks. So that actually, but again, there's a process through the SBA. But I think, according to our past conversation, that each state has their own kind of certification process. Is that correct?
It is correct and very different from federal, right? So none of the federal certifications really work in the state level. There are some national certifications if you're a minority in any way, woman, vet, minority, you can get those national certifications and those will help you in state contracts. But then in each individual state, you apply for their small diverse business registration. And every state is different. Some states are really easy, like Pennsylvania was really easy. Arizona, my home state.
Mhm.
Oh gosh, it was a trip. It was really long and arduous and
Oh,
kept me.
no.
So each one is different. And when we were talking a little while ago, Ricky, about like focusing in, finding your niche, focusing in. This is like a great thing that I like to tell people with state government. Don't say you can work in any state to start because there's no way you're going to have time to go sign up for all those certifications and get all that done for every single state. Good on you if you've got the resources for that, but most
Uh,
states won't, right?
no, you're right. Having a very narrow focus is, for me and for our clients, is absolutely essential. Even for the big companies,
Yeah.
you can't go after everything. And if you, and I always give the example of, and we could talk about this piece too. In federal, it's extremely important to find opportunities ahead of the solicitation,
Yes.
develop relationships with the government folks that are actually in charge of putting it on contract,
Yeah.
maybe even help develop the requirements. What are the specs involved? And so I spent a lot of my time meeting with companies when I was still in the Air Force. And the companies that came in and they were super specific, they knew what I needed. If I was doing something in cybersecurity, let's say it was data at rest, they would come in and say, "Hey, I know you need a solution that protects data at rest. That we are the absolute best at protecting data at rest. This is the solution that does that. This is the past performance." Those are the companies I love because they did their homework. They were solving the problem that I had to solve. They could help me with everything I needed to do. But then I would have, surprisingly, a lot of companies would come in and be like, "We do everything. We do all the cybersecurity is a big, we do all the cybersecurity stuff. By the way, if you need professional services, we could do that too." And someone will be like, "Yeah, and we've got a landscaping company." So even something not even related. And I'm just like, okay, nobody, they might be great at what they're talking about.
Way too broad, and it's the exact same in the state space. That's something that when you and I talked is a very common. That's a commonality that we have between state and federal. We tell people if you're going to bid cold, you have such a small chance of winning. And bidding cold means they don't know about you. You've never had any conversation. The other piece of the puzzle is in state piece where we generally work with service-based businesses, there is definitely a decent amount of narrative that you have to provide in that response. And there is no way that you're going to be able to stand out and get higher scores if you can't do more than just what they ask for in the RFP, right? If you can't show them a little bit more, that you understand their pain points,
Yeah.
that you understand their hot buttons. And the only way to know that is by building a relationship long before that RFP comes out. And in a perfect world, to your point, uh, that you have some input on that RFP. That's the
Yeah.
best case scenario, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you can't, I was just talking with a client right before this call. If it's when these solicitations come out, they're only so long, right? Even if it's a 50-page list, that's a lot of work for the government. Everything's not going to be in there. It's just not, whether they forgot or they just don't have time to put it in. When you're talking to them before, what I'd love to find out is what are the actual use cases? Because sometimes they don't include that. What is this service for specifically? And if you can get in there legally in the legal phase for federal, at least I don't know how state works, but in federal, there's a legal market research phase where you can talk to the government and learn
Yeah.
about that stuff. Now, all of a sudden, my proposal is specific to the use case and nobody else's is going to be because it wasn't in the solicitation. Um,
Right.
let's talk about that. In state, are there any rules prohibiting the state? Let's say that a solicitation's out.
Yep.
Are there any rules that prohibit the contracting officer for the state from talking to companies and answering their questions, or is that they can do that legally and there's no problems?
Yeah, the contracting officer has the control, and every state is different, but mostly 99% of the time what happens is that there's a Q&A period, whether it's a bidders conference or a week-long period where you can email the contracting officer
Mhm.
or the general Q&A. That's the only time that you can talk to anybody, but you're talking to procurement. You're talking to the contracting officer. You're not talking to the agency where the people are really feeling the pain and they're the ones that are delivering the service. And to your point, all of those things that you can learn in some of those conversations and you can ask the question. But the best case scenario is you've been building a relationship for a year and you happen to be talking to the key buyer, one of the key decision makers, and they're just having a bad day and they know you, they trust you, and they're like, oh my gosh, this vendor over here did XYZ and it's just annoying the heck out of me.
Yep.
Those things that they're never going to write that kind of stuff into an RFP, but you have a leg up knowing that their hot button is that this vendor over here just shows up 5 minutes late every single time. Guess what? You can write to that. You can really hit on those things, but you got to know them,
Yeah.
right? You're not having conversations. You're just
Yeah.
not.
No, you're absolutely right. So there's a lot of similarities with the certifications. How much of an advantage does that give you?
It depends, right? I always hate that answer, but it depends. Every state is different. Some states really embrace small businesses and some really embrace small, diverse businesses. So I'll give you Pennsylvania, Missouri, Illinois, really great states for embracing small, diverse businesses. And so they have supplier diversity agencies that track it, that really, they have high percentages for primes to
Yeah.
say, prime, you've got to subcontract out 30% of this contract or 15% of this contract. State of California always has a DVBE requirement. Almost always. I shouldn't say always, but I've never seen an RFP from California that didn't have that requirement. So,
That's disabled veteran.
yep,
Okay.
exactly. Verification.
All right. So
Yes.
I should be
Every,
trying to sell to the state of California, is what you're telling me.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Sounds good. No, that's awesome. So what, if you could, so you talked a little bit about that, but what states would you, if you could highlight a couple, focus on different things or spending a lot of money in certain areas? I know that, for instance, you mentioned California. If you're an SDVOSB, how do you think about companies that come to you with a specific solution, right? Like cybersecurity or IT. That's a kind of popular one. Do some states stand out as spending more in an area like that than others? Are some states known for, if you get a construction client in, do you, okay, we need to go to Arizona because that's where the work is, or California, or is it just no holds barred? You're just blanket looking at all the states.
It's a little bit of both. And it really depends. And I hate to keep saying that, but like Pennsylvania, again, going back to Pennsylvania, they have pretty high thresholds. For example, we were just working with one in particular that Pennsylvania contract has a 30% subcontract to a small diverse business. That's a high percentage. That's a
Mm,
really high percentage. And a lot of their contracts we see between 20 and 30%. But also like construction, it depends on what part of construction. Same with technology. Is it fiber optics? Is it cybersecurity? Which piece of that? And every state's a little bit different and different at different times because they have different spending. So when the ARPA funds came down, They had a whole lot of RFPs that went out and they didn't necessarily have a small diverse business because they were just threshold because they were just trying to get the money spent. And so we don't know. I would say that I personally don't know. My team probably knows more than I do all of the individual states and what some of their requirements are. But
Yeah.
we, for our clients, look at that. We work a lot more with primes than we do with the subs sometimes, and
Mhm.
we'll find subs to fulfill that requirement.
Okay. Part of what we do on the federal side is being very specific and targeting. For me, that's federal spending is public, and I'm assuming a lot of the state is public as well. Uh, for me, that's, and I don't know if it's harder or easier because you got so many states to deal with, but I want to know which agency spends the most amount of money in the area or the focus area that or the niche that my client has. And of course, then I can go further. They have certain certifications. I can look at, okay, does it change things if I'm looking at a SDB, OSB or whatnot? But how do you go about targeting? Is it, or do you, is that as important with state? Do you target by state? Do you target by, do you have different criteria? Is it where your actual business is located? What are the kind of the first steps that I might be thinking about? I've never sold to the state. I'm in Massachusetts. Does that mean I should start here or should I be looking at in other places?
We generally, if we've got a brand new client that's not done state contracting at all, we generally tell them start in your home state because you're there. A lot of times, our state RFPs will have requirements for location. Alaska's one in particular that is very particular about being local. California also with the disabled vet certification. They want their disabled vets to be local. So
Sure.
some states are very big on local. And so what we do, we start there. We look at their local state, see what's going on, see if what they're doing is a fit. But we start even sooner than that to say, what is your ideal client? We call it a high value client. What does that look like to you? And we really define what that high value client looks like.
Mhm.
And we can from there go and say, okay, which states would be a good match? Because some states, again, don't care about small, diverse business, and some do. Some states need you to be local, some don't. And so we then from there start pulling the list of states. What's going on with them right now? What are some of their priorities for the next 12 to 18 months? What are some of their terms and conditions that may or may not fit that client? So it can be a slog because you've got to look at every individual state. And then, oh, by the way, as soon as the administration turns over, election time, any of that, all of those priorities can change,
Right.
pretty quickly, especially if the party changes. So
Is there a, and I think I know some of the answer to this. If I want to talk to my audience that isn't selling to the government yet, that is just interested, usually what I'll do is I'll tell them you could start by going to usaspending.gov and start looking at federal spending just to give you an idea of does the government buy what you sell, what agency. So some of that work they could certainly do on their own without having to pay for a system. Is there a system that or a website that you send people to that could give them kind of an overview of all of the states? Or is it really, I know some of the tools have state and local, like I can look for solicitation state and locally and like GovWin IQ, which is really expensive, but I don't know if there's a free resource that just looks at everything and presents it to you or your gives you the ability to search through it. Is there anything like that? And where do you send people for information?
there's not anything super simple. There are things that you can piece together. There's and off the top of my head, I can't remember the website, but I can send it to you so you can put it in the show notes. But like the National Association of State Procurement Officers, there's a website that talks about their procurement environment, which is important to understand if it's centralized, what some of their priorities are. So you can piece together things like that. What we generally say is two things. One, go to the state website, read press releases from the governor for the last 12 months and just get an idea if there's anything in there in your world. For example, if it's cybersecurity, what are they talking about when it comes to cybersecurity? I would also look at the state budget for sure. Listen to the governor's state of the state from the prior year just to get an idea of that budget. There's so much information around the budget that is not always easy to wade through, but there's also a lot of meeting minutes. So you can listen to legislate or you can read about legislative sessions. It's just a lot. The
Yeah.
other thing we recommend doing is there's a website called findrfp.com. It's not the best one. It's an aggregator. And what I mean by that is it aggregates opportunities, federal, state, local, all of that. It's not the best one, but it's the cheapest one. It's $30 a month. And I always just go out there, put your keywords in and start seeing what's coming around.
Yeah.
See what the requirements are, especially if you're a small business, because if you've never done this before, you're going to find out things like insurance requirements that you've got to have. And are you ready for that? You can start to see what they're requiring around past performance.
Sure.
Maybe you don't have because you've never worked in government. How are you going to go get that? So those are some of the places that we start with our clients.
Okay. One question I have is, so on the federal side, we have already talked about how important it is to find opportunities before the solicitation, right? So we're not just engaging for the first time. Now, on the federal side, we have something that an office can put out called a sources sought, and that's not a solicitation for a proposal. That's basically the office saying, look, I'm going to put, we'll stay with cybersecurity. I'm going to put cybersecurity, a company on contract to do this type of work, maybe data at rest, and maybe it's in a classified environment. I want to understand A, what kind of companies are out there? Can small businesses do this? I want to understand B, what is the latest in technology that could solve problem X? And maybe, hey, what kind of contract vehicles are you on? But that's one way to find opportunities early and to know the exact office to contact and begin that relationship with. I might have that source of sought 12 months before solicitation or 2 months, just depends on their timing. And it could, by the way, also that could end up with a sole source award if I do it correctly and they're open to that. So is there anything like that on the state side? How would I go about finding an opportunity before the solicitation on the state side? Do they have a similar process or is it just totally different?
It's totally different. And there are some states that will release information like on their procurement websites. They'll have, there's, again, hate to keep coming back to Pennsylvania, but they do this really. They have a upcoming RFPs list on their website. But frankly, on the state side, there's nothing good like that. And it is about being in. This is why that targeting is so important. It's about being in those relationships with the buyers of the agencies that you know that you want to work with and just staying in touch with them and them giving you a heads up. Every now and then states will put out what's called an RFI, which is a request for information.
Yep.
And that will give you a heads up that an RFP is coming. You need to respond to that generally in order to get on the list to respond to the RFP. Sometimes, I need to say it, sometimes their RFIs are just because they want to make sure that their current vendor isn't screwing them and they don't have any intent of going out to RFP. But
Yep.
there's probably a huge way of knowing that, unless, guess what? You're building relationships already and you're having conversations.
Sure. Okay, so I'm trying to piece together and just giving people an example, right? Okay, and let's just say I have a cybersecurity business, which I do not, but so I'm in Massachusetts. I have this cybersecurity business and I've talked to you. I'm thinking about maybe hiring you, but I'm not sure yet. I want to do some digging on my own, right? So I've listened to this podcast and I heard you say, I want to go look at what the governor's press releases have been. And I go to the site, see a bunch of solicitations, but I know that's too late. I want to find it earlier. So maybe I identify something in one of the press releases about improving cybersecurity and vulnerability in Massachusetts networks or something. Uh, how do I go about like finding the buyers, the potential buyers for some of that stuff? And because I want to develop those relationships, if there's no sources sought, no RFI, how do I find those people?
Yeah, it can be a little bit daunting in the government space. So, a couple of different ways. One, pick up the phone and call the procurement department and ask, who, this is what we do. Some procurement departments are going to be better than others. Some are going to be super helpful, some are not. If you are a diverse supplier, call the supplier diversity agency. That's what they're there for, is to help connect you.
Okay.
So those are two ways, for sure. The other way is just good old fashioned, like boots on the ground sales prospecting, right? Go to LinkedIn, see if you can
Hmm.
working for the agency, connect with them. And when you do that, and anytime you get a connection, please don't just be all about pitching your services. Everybody in the world cares about what's in it for me, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving them a what's in it for them, why they're going to listen to you. Don't go in with everything but the kitchen sink like you were talking about a little while ago. And it is just good old fashioned prospecting. And sometimes it's a slog, sometimes it's easier than others, but those are the 3 avenues really, like LinkedIn, try to connect with them, start building a relationship, pick up the phone and call. Call the agency. If this is the agency that's gonna be buying, just call the agency and start be really nice to whoever picks up the phone, build those relationships, and it's gonna take a while to crack in, but you'll get there. If you're tenacious and you're adding value to them and not just pitching your wares, they'll open up for you.
Okay. No, that's great advice. And it's interesting how many people don't want to pick up the phone, right? So if you're picking up the phone and calling someone, I guarantee you're ahead of 99% of the people out there that are
Mhm.
not doing that, right?
Yes, 100%.
Do you see, I would say the number one problem I see on the federal side is meaning number one problem with companies that want to sell to the government have been trying and are failing and either give up or in a last, I don't know, in a last desperation move, call me to see what they're doing wrong. I would say the most common thing is they just find the solicitations and are writing proposals on them and they're not winning.
Yep. We see
What
that.
what would you say are like the top one or two reasons people aren't winning on your side, on the state and local side?
I would say the 2 top reasons. One is just what we've been talking about. They have no relationship with the buyer. They're bidding cold. There's going to be another person, another bidder in there. You might get lucky. I don't know about you. RFPs are hard. They take a lot of time and resources. I don't know if you want to put all of your hope in hope, right? All of your eggs in the hope basket. But that's really one of the big things. And then the second thing is that everybody that's bidding most of the time, has the requirements and the qualifications that are going to answer the questions. It's not enough to just do that. You've got to distinguish yourself. And so the companies that don't distinguish themselves, don't have anything other than just answering that question, talking all about themselves, not tying their solution to the need of the client, and so that all comes down to how are you packaging your content and delivering that in a way that's going to resonate and show distinction. That's probably the first biggest thing, but you can't do that well if you don't have the relationships built.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When companies come to me and ask about selling to the government, they sometimes are unaware of the timelines. Federal contracting has a long timeline. It can be extremely profitable. It can be extremely, what you're on contract can be very solid, a nice new stream of revenue that you don't necessarily have to worry about, but it takes a while to get there. I usually tell them 12 to 18 months. It can take 2 years to start from scratch, build a relationship to contract closure. What do the timelines look like on your side?
Say similar, but maybe a little bit shorter, right? Maybe 12 months, 9 to 12 months. It comes down to, it depends, right? How tenacious you are with building those relationships. If you are only reaching out once a quarter, it's going to take you a lot longer. If you're reaching out a couple of times a month and really building that relationship, it can be shorter. And it depends on when the contracts come up for renewal, or states can also say, oh, we're writing a new RFP for XYZ and we're going to have it out in February and it's October before it. So
Yeah.
it plays, but I would say in general, 9 to 12 months is probably
Okay.
pretty.
So a little bit shorter, but still it's a good timeline. A small business comes to you. They have a small business, never sold anything. But you know what? I really don't want to sell commercially or B2B. I just want to sell to the state government and I want that to be my business. What's your answer to that? Is that possible? Is it something they should avoid and get commercial sales first? What's your gut, like a general response to that?
Yeah, small business generally, the gut is go and work as a sub to a prime for a while because you're going to need some past performance. So it really depends on what their past performance looks like. But generally, if they don't have any state past performance, they need to go be a sub for a little while to get that under their belt and be able to talk about it in the proposal.
Okay. And is that something you help with as well? I think you said, mentioned that. Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Look, you have been very gracious with your time answering all of our questions. And we probably have a lot of people listening that want to start selling to the state and local government. If they're looking for your help with the RFP Success Company, how can they find you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Now, the best way to reach out, frankly, is just to email me at lisa at rfpsuccess.com. just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to talk to you or to connect you with the right team member. And we'll talk through whether it's a good option for you or not.
Awesome. Well, we're going to put that in the show notes. And just if you have, what would your parting thoughts be to somebody thinking about getting started in state and local government? What do you think the next first couple of steps, in addition to, obviously reaching out to you with your email address and getting some help would be?
Here's what I would say is that this is not a magic pill. This is not the diet that's going to let you lose 20 pounds overnight. So if you're thinking that, oh, I'm just going to go get this lucrative $1 million+ contract that's going to last for 3 to 5 years, which is valid. That's why state government contracting is so wonderful. But there's a lot of work you have to do to get that. It's not just about answering questions to an RFP that comes in and magically you're going to get that contract. So mindset is really important, knowing that it can change the trajectory of a business, especially a small business. When you get a 3-year contract, the ability to manage your business better and manage your staffing is huge. But you just have to have the mindset that you're going to have to put some work in. We're here to help you if you want help with it, but there's work to do for sure.
Yeah, no, that's well said. So I think it sounds like state and federal have a lot of similarities, one of which is it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a get rich quick scheme. This is you need to put the work in and you need to do it over time and you need to be persistent and continuous and smart about it. And if you can afford to get some help along the way, get that help. If you can't afford it yet, listen to the podcasts and the free resources out there. At least you're making the right steps. Lisa, thank you again for appearing on the podcast. I'm going to put everything in the show notes for everybody listening so you can contact her. You can also, of course, go to her website, rfpsuccess.com, if you're interested in state and local. Thanks, guys, for listening to DoD Contract Academy. And if you need any help with federal, DoD, go to dodcontract.com. We have some paid for and free resources there. And Lisa, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's been a pleasure.